I stopped a concert once in the third bar. The Argent rooms were full that night, 600 candles burning above 600 people, and a young man from Vienna had come a very long way to play for them. He had a fine coat and a finer reputation, and he took the opening of a nocturne as though he were dragging a plow through it. I raised one hand. That was all. I did not stand, I did not speak, and I have never once in my life raised my voice in a concert room. But the man saw my hand, and the room saw the man see it, and the music died on the strings like a candle pinched between two fingers. They called me the cold patron after that. The name traveled faster than any piece of music I ever championed. In London, it was said that a word from the Duke of Harrowmere could put a composer's name in every drawing room from Bath to Edinburgh, and that the lifting of my hand could send him home to his mother. Both things were true. I had money, I had a name 300 years old, and I had ears. Nothing in the world frightened me and nothing in the world moved me, and I was, at 31, as lonely as a lighthouse. I tell you this so that you will understand what she did to me, not what I did for her. Everyone tells that part wrong. There was one composer in England I could not touch. His name, I believed it a man's name. God forgive me, I never once considered otherwise, was Vesper. That was all. One word, printed small at the head of the page, over music that took the top of my head off. It had begun 7 years before with a set of 6 songs sold in a music seller's shop on a wet street, threepence apiece, printed on cheap paper. I bought them because the shop was warm. I read the first 8 bars standing at the counter with rain running off my hat brim, and I did not move for a quarter of an hour. Anyone can write a pretty tune. Vesper wrote silences. There was a rest in the fourth of those songs, one beat, exactly where the ear begged for the voice to go on, and the beat of nothing that came instead was more beautiful than any note in the piece. I have heard a great deal of music. I had never once been made to hear the absence of it. I went back to that shop every week for 7 years. The music seller was a dry, careful man named Quillen, with spectacles pushed up on his forehead and a way of looking at his ledger when I asked him questions. Vesper's works came to him. A sonata, a set of variations, a mass that no cathedral in England would perform because no one knew who had written it, and Quillen printed them and would say nothing else. Where does he live? I could not say, Your Grace. You could, you choose not to. Just so, Your Grace. I offered him money. I offered a great deal of money. Once, in the worst winter of my life, when my brother had been 3 months dead, and the house at Harrowmere was so quiet I could hear the clocks arguing with each other, I offered Quillen a sum that would have bought his shop and the 2 on either side of it, only to be told where I might send a letter. He took off his spectacles, polished them, and put them back. Your Grace, he said, if I did such a thing the music would stop coming. Why? Because, he said, that is the condition. So I went home and sat in the dark and played the songs badly on the pianoforte with my own inadequate hands, and thought about a man somewhere in England who had written down exactly what grief sounds like when it is 1 beat long, and who did not wish to be found. I decided he must be a monk, or a proud man, or dying. I built him 50 times over in my mind, and every one of them was a man. 7 years. I want that understood. 7 years of being the cleverest man in any room in England, and I never once wondered whether the reason Vesper hid was standing in that room too, holding somebody's music, waiting to be told when to turn the page. I met her in my aunt's drawing room, in the last week of October. My Aunt Adeline, the Dowager Lady Cray, 68 years old, with a wit like a dropped razor and the most disgraceful taste in music of any woman living, had summoned me to hear her latest discovery. She did this 3 or 4 times a year. Her discoveries were invariably curates with tenor voices, and I invariably went, because she had sat with me the winter my brother died, and had not once said anything comforting, which I had found more comforting than anything else in the world. The curate sang. He sang the way a man rows a boat. I sat in the second row with my gloves in my hand, and my face doing what my face does, which is nothing, and I let my eyes wander to the pianoforte. There was a young woman seated at the left of the instrument on a low stool, half in shadow, and she was turning the pages for my aunt's accompanist. I had watched 100-page turners. It is the humblest office in music. You sit, you count, you reach up, you turn, and if you are good at it, no living soul ever notices you exist. She was better than good. She turned on the exact instant so that the accompanist's eye never once hunted for the next line. But there was something else, and it took me half the song to see it. She was correcting. Not aloud, not with her hands. Her chin moved a fraction, a hairsbreadth, a half-beat before every phrase, and every time it moved to where the music ought to have gone, and where the poor sweating accompanist had not taken it. She was conducting the whole room from a stool, with nothing but the line of her jaw, and no one saw it, and it was the most exact musical intelligence I had encountered in 10 years of London concert rooms. I looked at her properly then. 24, perhaps 5. A gray gown that had been turned and mended at the cuff. Fair skin, brown hair pinned up with 2 of the pins losing the argument. A face too still to be called pretty by anyone who had never been made to look twice. Ink on the side of her right forefinger, and her eyes had gone somewhere behind the music, out and away, to a place where evidently the curate did not exist. The song ended. The room applauded the way rooms do. "Ambrose," said my aunt, seizing my arm as though I were a banister, "your face. You look as though you have swallowed a bee. Was he not delightful?" He was audible. "You are a savage. Miss Ashcombe, come here and be introduced before he ruins my evening entirely. Ambrose, this is Miss Verity Ashcombe, my companion, who is the only person in this house who can read my hand, endure my temper, and tune my instrument, and I would sooner lose the roof." The girl rose from the stool and curtsied, and did not look up long enough for me to see her eyes. "Miss Ashcombe." "Your Grace." 2 words, a low voice, unhurried. She stood with her hands folded and her chin very slightly lifted, the way a person stands who is used to being looked past and has decided not to mind it, and I discovered that I disliked the composure of it in a way I could not account for. I have since understood that what I disliked was being unable to see in. "You turn pages well," I said. "Thank you, Your Grace." "You also disagreed with the accompanist 11 times. That got me her eyes, gray and startled wide, and then, this is the thing I have never forgotten, the thing I turned over for the whole of that winter, a swift, guarded flicker of pure delight, instantly put away, like a woman closing a book on her finger because someone has come into the room. 12, she said. I laughed. I want to be clear about what that cost. I had not laughed aloud in company since my brother went into the ground. My aunt's fan stopped moving. 2 dowagers by the fire turned around. Miss Ashcombe went the color of a winter apple and looked at the carpet. 12, I agreed. Where was the 12th? It does not signify. Miss Ashcombe, where was the 12th? She raised her head. The final cadence. He hurried it. It is marked to be held, and it wants to be held because the whole song has been asking one question, and that is the only bar in which the singer answers it. He would not wait. She stopped. Her hands tightened on each other. I beg your pardon. It is not my place to say so. Do you play? The pause was very small. If I had not spent my life listening for the space between things, I would have walked straight past it. A little, Your Grace, as all girls do. Play now. No, she said. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with music. A duke had asked, and a paid companion had said no, flatly, without ornament, and every woman in that drawing-room understood that Miss Ashcombe would be looking for a new situation before the month was out. My aunt laughed like a gunshot. Ha, Ambrose, you have been refused. Come and eat something. And I let myself be taken to the supper table, because I could think of nothing else to do. And Miss Ashcombe went back into her corner and gathered the music and put it in order, and did not look at me again all evening. I lay awake that night. Not on account of her. You must believe I did not think of her that way. Not then, not for weeks. But because she had said the whole song has been asking one question, and that is the only bar in which the singer answers it. And I had heard 60 years of critics in that room, and not one of them in my hearing had ever said a true thing about music so plainly. I went back the next day. I told myself it was to see my aunt. She was in the small parlor at a writing desk copying. That is the word for it. There is no romantic word. Before her, propped on the ledge, was a page of manuscript in someone's cramped hand, and she was ruling staves and transcribing the parts out fair, so that 4 players might each have their own. It is the labor of a clerk. Copyists were paid in that year something between a shilling and 18 pence a sheet, and the good ones went blind by 40. She stood at once, ink on her fingers again, a smudge of it beneath her eye where she had pushed back her hair. Her ladyship is not yet down, your grace. I know, sit, work. She did not sit. I looked at the sheet. Her hand was beautiful. I mean the notation was beautiful, small and black and level as a hedge, the note heads all leaning at the same angle, the rests placed with a kind of tenderness. There is a superstition among musicians that you can hear the character of a copyist in the shape of a stem. I had never believed it before I stood in that parlor. Who taught you to write music? My father, your grace. He was organist and choir master at a foundation in the north. He had 4 daughters and no sons, and he taught us all, because there was no one else to make up the choir. Where is he? Dead these 6 years. And the 4 daughters? Married, your grace, 3 of them. She said it evenly. She had a great gift for evenness. I looked at the mended cuff of her gown and the ink and the shilling a sheet, and something in my chest turned over. Miss Ashcombe, I have at Harrowmere a music library that my grandfather began and my father neglected and my brother could not read. It is 900 volumes and perhaps 2,000 loose manuscripts. Some of it is worthless. Some of it, I believe, has not been looked at in 80 years, and I cannot tell which is which, because I have not the hand to copy nor the patience to catalogue, and the man I engaged last year was a fool who filed by the color of the binding. She waited. I will pay a copyist's wage and 3 times over. A room, a fire, your own instrument. My aunt spends her winters with her sister in Bath and does not want you. You would be at Harrowmere from the first snow until the thaw. For the first time she looked at me directly, and I saw the calculation go through her, the whole cold arithmetic that women in her situation must do and men in mine never do at all. A duke, a house, no mistress in it, her name, which was the only thing she owned. Your grace is very good, I cannot. Why? Because I have my reputation, she said, and it is worth more to me than 3 times a copyist's wage, and your grace has never in his life had to think about his, and so did not think of mine. Nobody had spoken to me like that in 11 years. I felt it go into me like a splinter of glass, cold and clean. Then I will think of it now, I said. My aunt will come to Harrowmere with you and stay the winter. She detests Bath. She detests her sister. She will complain from October to March and eat my kitchen out of existence, and you will be as safe under my roof as you are under hers. Miss Ashcombe stood very still. Then she put down her pen and turned the sheet she had been copying so that it faced me, and I read it, a plodding little rondo by nobody, and she said, in the voice of a woman opening a door an inch, 900 volumes, and 2,000 manuscripts. Is there by it? Is there anything from before the Restoration? There is a chest in the muniment room that has not been opened in my lifetime. I watched her fight it. I watched her lose. She had, I learned later, spent 6 years wanting one thing in the world, and it was not a husband and it was not a home. It was to see what was inside such a chest. I will come, she said, if her ladyship comes. My aunt came. She complained from October to March. She ate my kitchen out of existence. She lived another 11 years and named her cat after me, and I have not, in all that time, stopped being grateful to her. Harrowmere in November is a hard place. It sits in a fold of moor with its back to the north, an abbey the family had made into a house 300 years ago, and the wind comes over the ridge with nothing between it and Norway. The rooms are too tall to warm. Frost forms on the inside of the glass in the long gallery. My brother had hated it. I have loved it my whole life, precisely because it does not pretend, and because in a house that big and that quiet a man can hear anything. She arrived in the second week, in a hired chaise with a small trunk, and she stood in the great hall looking up at the vaulting with snow melting on her shoulders, and I saw her mouth move as though she were counting. "What are you doing?" "Listening, Your Grace." She turned her head and clapped once sharply. The sound went up and came back to us 4 seconds later off the stone, transformed, softened, singing. "Oh," she said to nobody. "Oh, but you could put a choir in here and never need an organ at all." Then she remembered herself and colored and apologized. I said nothing. I stood in my own hall like a stranger in it. In 29 years of that house, I had never once thought to clap my hands to hear what it did. She began work the next morning at 8, and I did not see her for 4 days. I confess that I contrived, on the 5th, to want a book from the library. The library at Harrowmere is a long room with a gallery, and the music had all been shoveled into the north end of it, and I came in at the south door and stopped. She had made an island. Volumes in stacks, 20 and 30 high, and paper laid out on the floor in ranks across a good 60 feet of carpet, and Miss Ashcombe on her knees in the middle of it with her sleeves pinned back and a smudge of 200-year-old dust across her forehead, holding a manuscript up to the gray windowlight with an expression I can only call famished. She saw me. She did not get up, she said. "Your Grace, do you know what this is?" "I do not." "Neither does anybody," she said. "It is a set of consort songs, and there is no name on it, and the paper is Italian, and the hand is English, and it is at least 180 years old, and the 4th song." She stopped and pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. "The 4th song is the most beautiful thing I have ever held." I crossed the room. I knelt down beside her on my own carpet in my own library like a boy, and she laid the sheet between us, and she sang it. Her voice was not large. It had not been trained by anyone but a country organist, and it was not the voice you would pay a guinea to hear at the Argent Rooms. It went straight through my ribs and out the other side. She sang 3 phrases and stopped where the paper was torn and looked at the gap with such a look of personal grief that I said, before I knew I meant to, "I will find you the rest of it if I have to buy every library in England." She turned her face to me. There was dust on her cheek and her eyes were bright and unguarded, and for one entire heartbeat there was nothing between us at all. Then the door opened, and my aunt came in complaining about the draft, and Miss Ashcombe stood up and became a companion again, and I went out onto the terrace with no hat and stood in the sleet for 20 minutes trying to understand what had gone wrong with my breathing. The winter closed over Harrowmere. The roads went first, then the post came only twice a week, and then not at all for 11 days. And in that closed white silence, a thing began that I have never been able to explain to any man I know, because every man I know assumes it began with her face. It began with argument. Every evening after dinner, my aunt in her chair with her feet at the fire and her book upside down on her lap because she was asleep, Miss Ashcombe and I fought about music. Not politely. She had no rank to lose and had evidently decided, somewhere around the 3rd week, that I would not dismiss her for saying what she thought, and so she said it. She thought the Italians were sentimental. I said this was the opinion of a woman who had never heard a good one. She said she had heard a very bad one that very year, and I had praised him in print. She thought my grandfather's copy of an old mass was in the wrong key and had been transposed by an idiot. She was right. She thought that a composer who wrote too many notes was a man frightened of being found out, and that the bravest thing in music was arrest, because arrest cannot be hidden behind. I put down my glass. Say that again. Which? About the rest. She looked at me warily. Anyone may fill a bar with notes, Your Grace. Only a person who is certain will leave it empty and let the listener stand there with nothing. It is like, she searched and found it, it is like telling the truth and then not saying anything more to soften it. The fire cracked. My aunt snored delicately. There is a composer, I said, who does that. Is there, said Miss Ashcombe. He signs himself Vesper. 7 years I have collected him. There is a rest in one of his early songs, one beat, on the very hinge of the phrase, and it is the finest thing written in England in my lifetime. I heard my own voice do something I did not permit it to do in public. I have offered his publisher a fortune to tell me his name. She was folding a piece of paper, very carefully, corner to corner. And he will not. He will not. Perhaps, she said, the man does not wish to be known. Every man wishes to be known. She looked up then, and I have thought about that look for the rest of my life. There was something behind it turning over, deciding, weighing me, weighing whether I was worth the risk of the truth. And I sat there in my own drawing room, 6 feet from her, the arbiter of English music, and I did not read one word of it. Perhaps, she said at last, he is known exactly as much as he can bear. Then she rose and made her curtsy and went to bed, and I sat until the fire was cinders. The pianoforte lived in the winter parlor, and I had it tuned for her, and she played at 8 in the morning when she believed the house asleep. I was not asleep. From the second week of December I was never asleep at 8 in the morning, and I sat in the passage outside that room, on a cold oak settle in my dressing gown, like a lunatic, listening to my aunt's companion play. She played the way other people breathe. It was not display. She despised display. There was no glitter in her hands at all. She would play a piece slowly through and then stop and play 4 bars again, and again, and again, changing something so small I could not always hear what it was. And then on the 5th time the 4 bars would open like a hand and be right, and I would sit on that settle with my head against the wall and my eyes shut, and be entirely undone. And sometimes this is the part I could not account for. Sometimes she played something I did not know. That was itself remarkable. I knew every published thing in Europe. Once she played 11 bars, stopped, and I heard her say aloud distinctly in a voice of complete disgust, "No." Silence, a long one. Then the 11 bars again, different, and this time she did not say no. She played it 4 times more, and then she went on into something else, and I sat outside the door with the hair standing on my arms because I had just heard someone make a thing out of nothing, and I had no idea what I had heard. Of course I asked her, that evening over the chessboard, "What was it you were playing this morning? The thing in G with the falling figure?" She did not move. Her hand hovered over her bishop. "An exercise, Your Grace." "Whose?" "No one's, a study, finger-work. My father set them for us. I hardly know where they come from any longer. They are of no consequence." It was of consequence. It was scales, she said, with ideas above their station. And she took my bishop, and the moment passed, and she beat me in 14 moves, and I let her go up to bed, and I did not sleep. I should say what was happening to me, since I did not say it to her. I had begun, in the way of a man who has never learned the words for it, to love her. Not for her face, though by January I had stopped being able to look at it directly. For her mind. For the way she said asterisk, no asterisk to 11 bars of music at 8 in the morning with nobody to hear. For the fact that she was the only person in England who did not flinch when I raised my hand. I had lived my whole life among people who wanted something from me, and here was a woman with ink on her fingers and one good gown who wanted nothing from me at all, nothing but the chest in the muniment room, and the 4th song with the torn page, and to be let alone, and who argued with me about the Italians until midnight. And I could not say a word of it, because I was a duke and she was a paid companion in my house, dependent on me for her bread, and there is a name for a man who speaks to such a woman of love while she is under his roof and cannot leave. I would sooner have put my hand in the fire. So I said nothing, and instead I wrote to Quillen. I wrote to Quillen because I had had an idea, the worst and best idea of my life, and it was this. I would make Vesper famous whether he liked it or not, under his own name if he would give it, anonymously if he would not. Quillen had 3 years before printed a symphony, a full symphony, in 4 movements by Vesper, which no orchestra in England had ever played because no orchestra will spend 40 men's wages on the work of a man with no name and no patron. I had the name. I had the 40 men's wages. I would take the Argent Rooms in April and put that symphony before 600 people and stand at the front of the room and dare London to look away. I told Miss Ashcombe over the chessboard in the last week of January, because I could not keep it in. She had just moved a night. She went white. I mean that exactly. Every particle of blood went out of her face, and her hand stayed in the air above the board with the night still in it. "You are ill." "No, Miss Ashcombe." "The Argent Rooms," she said, "in April. The 10th. I have written to Quillen to inform him and to demand that he tell Vesper. He has 3 months to come forward and take his bows. If he does not come, we play it regardless, and the world will spend the summer arguing about who he is. And if he does not wish to be argued about, then he should not have written it," I said. I was so pleased with myself. I remember it. I sat in my chair with my legs stretched to the fire, the cold patron, the man who could make a name in a night, and I said, "He owes it to the music, if not to himself. It is the greatest work of this age, and it is rotting in a drawer in a shop. Somebody must be brave on his behalf." She set the knight down in the wrong square. "Somebody must be brave," she repeated. "You are not attending. That is a dreadful move." "Yes," said Verity Ashcombe, "it was." She left the room. She did not play the next morning, nor the next, and on the 3rd day I found the winter parlor cold and the instrument shut, and a fine layer of ash dust on the lid, and I stood there with my heart going like a hammer and understood absolutely nothing. I have gone over the next 3 weeks 1,000 times, every hour of them. She was ill. That was what my aunt said. She kept to her room, and then when she came down she was polite. She was so polite. She copied and catalogued and answered when spoken to, and did not once, in all that time, tell me that I was wrong about anything, and the house filled up with a silence that I could not clap my hands into. I thought she had guessed. Not the truth. I had no truth to guess at but my feeling for her. I thought she had seen it and was withdrawing with all the delicacy of a woman who does not wish to lose her place, and I hated myself, and I did the only thing my life had taught me to do with a thing I could not manage. I behaved worse. The Harrowmere Assembly was held in the last week of February in the long room of the inn at Ravensbridge, and it was the great event of the county year. 40 families, fiddles, a hired harp, a supper of ham. I loathed it. I attended it every year of my life because my father had, and because 11 of my tenants' daughters would have wept if the house sent no one. My aunt commanded a chair by the fire. Miss Ashcombe stood behind it in her gray gown with her hands folded, and was invisible, as companions are. I ought to have stayed by the fire. But there was a knot of people around the instrument at the far end, and among them Silas Bellamy. Bellamy, I must be fair to him, 30 years on, he was not wicked. He was a fashionable composer of no great gift and a very great deal of charm, with a fine head of curls, and he wrote music the way a man writes a letter of condolence, and he had lately come north to visit a family who thought him a great catch. He was holding forth, and the subject was Vesper. He had heard, of course. All London had heard by February that Harrowmere had taken the Argent Rooms for a symphony by a man who did not exist. And I say it is a hoax, your grace, a splendid hoax, and I say further that you are the hoaxer. Laughter. Bellamy, delighted with himself, raised his glass to me. Come, own it. The music is too good to be nobody's, and the nobody is too good to be true. It is not a hoax. Then who is he? A monk, a madman. They say in town he is a woman. The room laughed again, and the fiddles started, and I did not laugh, and here, exactly here in the long room of the inn at Ravensbridge with a fire smoking behind me. I destroyed my own life with one sentence, and I was so certain, and I even smiled as I said it. He is not a woman. Are you so sure? I had the pages with me. I want that on the record too, because it is the shape of my punishment, and I have never once tried to file the edges off it. I carried the first 8 leaves of the manuscript Symphony in my coat, everywhere, the way another man carries a portrait Quillen's fair copy in his clerk's hand, with the corrections in the composer's own, and I drew them out and unfolded them on the top of the pianoforte, and I began, out of pure vanity, to turn through them for Bellamy, one page and another, and another. Look at it, I said. Look at the second subject, look at the working of it. A woman's hand, ridiculous. No woman could have written this. The fiddles were loud. Perhaps 4 people heard me. Bellamy laughed and said something about the ladies of his acquaintance and their harps, and the moment passed for everybody in that room but 2. I turned my head because a man knows. She stood 10 feet away with a shawl over her arm, my aunt's, which she had gone to fetch. She was looking at the pages under my hands, not at me, at the pages. Her face had nothing in it whatsoever, and it was the most terrible thing I have ever seen, and I did not understand it then, and I understood it entirely 9 days later. Our eyes met. She curtsied, a perfect, unhurried curtsy, the sort a woman gives when she is not going to give anything else, and she carried the shawl to my aunt's chair and put it about her shoulders, and she stood behind her, and she did not look at me again. The ride home was 6 miles under a hard white moon. My aunt slept. Miss Ashcombe sat opposite me and watched the moor go by, and once, without turning her head, she said, "Your Grace is very certain." Of what? Of what a woman could not do. It was I heard myself and stopped and started again badly. It was Bellamy. He is an ass. One says things. One does, she agreed. Then, after 2 miles, might I ask your Grace a question? Anything. If Vesper were a woman, she said to the window, what would your Grace do? The wheels went round 11 times. I could hear them. I have never in my life wanted so much to give a good answer, and I did not have one because I had not spent 1 hour of the 7 years preparing it. And what I felt, God help me, was a flash of pure irritation that she was pressing a thing I had said carelessly, that she would not let it go, that she was making me feel foolish in a cold carriage at midnight. So I said it would change nothing about the music, which was true and generous, and I was proud of it, and I sat there like a fool waiting to be thanked. No, she said, so quietly I barely caught it above the wheels. It would change nothing about the music. At Harrowmere she got down without my hand, and went up the steps and was gone. The letter came 9 days later. On the first day the post could get through. Quillen wrote a clerk's hand. Level, small, no flourishes. He wrote to inform his Grace that the composer known as Vesper had been apprised of the intended performance at the Argent Rooms on the 10th of April, and that the composer withheld consent, and that he, Quillen, must therefore in conscience inform his Grace that no further works would be sent to his shop, and that the arrangement of 7 years' standing was at an end. And then at the bottom, having ruled a line under his signature the way he ruled a line under an account he was closing forever, he had added 5 sentences. I can recite them. Your Grace has done a great deal of good in the world and does not know what he has done here. I have kept this faith 11 years, the first 4 for a shilling, and the rest for love of the music. Your Grace desires a name to praise. The composer desires only to be let go on working, and cannot do so if she is known, as your Grace of all men should understand, having lately declared before a room full of persons what a woman's hand may and may not accomplish. She has been in your house since November. I sat with that letter in my hands for a length of time I cannot estimate. I did not doubt it for a single second. That is the thing. There was no moment of surely not asterisk. There was instead a great and terrible rearrangement, as when a man wakes and finds that the room he has slept in for 30 years has always had a window in the other wall. 11 bars and no asterisk spoken aloud with such disgust. The falling figure in G an exercise. A study. Scales with ideas above their station. The chin moving a half-beat before the phrase. The white face over the chessboard. If Vesper were a woman, what would your grace do? Perhaps he is known exactly as much as he can bear. An arrest, 1 beat long, that had held me up for 7 years, written in a cold room by a girl whose father had 4 daughters and no sons, who had been taught to make up the choir, who copied plotting rondos at 18 pence a sheet, and had never in her life been permitted to stand in a room and say, "I made this." I had told her she owed it to the music. I had told her that somebody must be brave on her behalf. I had held her own pages open under my hand and said, no woman could have written this, and she had stood 10 feet away with a shawl over her arm, and had said nothing at all, and had then asked me the only question that mattered, and I had answered it like a man patting a dog. I went to find her. She was not in the library. She was not in the winter parlor. She was in the muniment room, in her cloak and bonnet, with her trunk corded at her feet, closing the lid of the chest that had not been opened in my lifetime. She straightened. She looked at the letter in my hand. She had known Quillen would write, of course she had asked him to. "I am glad you have had it from him," she said, "and not from me. I could not have found the words to be so short." "Verity, your grace ought not to call me that." "Then tell me what to call you." My voice was not my own. "Vesper." She flinched, the first crack in her, and the last for some minutes. "That is a name for the head of a page," she said. "It is not a person. It cannot be introduced to your aunt. It cannot be married or ruined or dismissed without a character. It has no rooms to be turned out of. It is the only free thing I have ever owned in my life, and it is free precisely because it does not exist. And I made it when I was 17 years old and my father had just been buried, and I have kept it alive for 11 years by giving it nothing. No face, no letters, no praise, no bows, no name, nothing. Because the instant it has a face it becomes a curiosity, and a curiosity is not a composer. It is an entertainment. It is a woman who writes, and men will come to look at her, and they will say she is very clever for a woman, and then they will not print her, because it does not pay to print a curiosity twice. That is not true. I would print. You, she said, would print it. Yes. Your grace would build me a stage and stand at the front of it and dare London to sneer, and London would not sneer because London is frightened of you. She was shaking. And what becomes of me when you are dead? The room was very cold. I did not have one word. I have thought of it, she said more steadily. You cannot imagine how I have thought of it. If they knew, they would say kindly, some of them, that the Duke of Harrowmere found a governess who could scribble and made her a fashion for a season. And in 10 years no one would play the symphony at all. Not because it had got worse. Because it had got a woman's name on it, and there is no fashion so dead as last year's. I said a wicked thing at Ravensbridge. You said a common thing, she said, which is far worse. If you had said it out of malice I could have hated you comfortably. You said it as a man remarks upon the weather. It is what everyone knows. It is what the printers know, and the orchestras, and the subscribers, and the 4 gentlemen who have reviewed my mass without once suspecting, and the boy who sets the type. That is not a thing you did to me, your grace. That is the water I have swum in since I was 17. What you did to me. And now her chin came up, and her eyes were streaming, and her voice did not break, which was somehow the worst, was to be the one man alive whose ear I trusted, and to hold my pages in your 2 hands, and to say it while you were touching them. I said, I am so sorry. I know, she said, that is why I am going. And then, because she was more just than I have ever been. You have taken away no more than you gave. I have had 4 months of a library and a fire and a good instrument and an argument every night with the only person who ever contradicted me back. Nobody has ever contradicted me back. Her mouth trembled. She mastered it. I have written more here than in the last 3 years together. It is in the chest. Take it or burn it. It is yours. You paid for the paper. Verity, do not go. The chaise is at the door. The symphony. Cancel it, she said. Please. That is all I ask of you in the world. Cancel it and let me be nobody, and I will send you the next one through Quillen in the spring, and you will never know where it came from, and it will be better than this one. And that is the only way I know how to live. She got into the chaise. She had 11 pounds in a trunk and no character from my aunt, because my aunt was asleep, and I stood on the steps of my abbey with my grandfather's music library behind me, and I let her go, because she asked me to, and because for the first time in my life I could not think of a single thing that I had a right to insist upon. She went to her married sister in the north. I know that now, then I knew nothing. I did not cancel the Argent Rooms. I understand how that sounds. Hear the rest. I went to Quillen. I took the mail coach like an ordinary man, and I stood in that shop with the rain running off my hat brim as it had 7 years before, and I said, I am not here for her direction. I am here because you have known her 11 years and I have known her 4 months and I require to be taught. He looked at me for a long moment over his spectacles. Then he shut the shop. We sat in his back room for 6 hours. He told me about a girl of 17 in a black gown who had come in with a fair copy of 6 songs and had asked, in a voice like a person walking to the scaffold, whether he supposed a music seller might print them without a name upon them. He told me that he had said the trade would want a name, and she had said, then put Vesper, and he had said, whose is that? And she had said, it is nobody's. It is the last office of the day. It is when they sing before the dark. He told me that she had never once taken more than her share, and had twice refused it. That when the Mass was reviewed she had written him a letter of such joy that he had kept it. That she copied other men's music for 18 pence a sheet to eat, and wrote her own between 11 at night and 1 in the morning, and that in 11 years she had received, from the whole of the printed world, in total, 41 pounds. And what she wants, said Quillen, is not 41 pounds, your grace. It is to go on. That is all any of them want, the real ones, to go on and not be stopped. I said, I have spent my life stopping people. Yes, he said, you have. I went out into the rain. I walked from that shop to the Argent Rooms 3 miles, and I stood in the empty hall in the dark with the chairs stacked, and I thought about a rest, 1 beat long, and how a rest cannot be hidden behind. Here is what I did with my 7 years' worth of certainty, and my grandfather's money, and the terrible weight of being the cold patron. I engaged the orchestra, 61 players, the finest in England, at a cost I declined to state. I engaged the hall. I let it be known, in the way things are let to be known, that Harrowmere would present the Vesper Symphony on the 10th of April, and that Vesper's identity would be disclosed from the platform that night. I told absolute lies about it. I let London believe I had my man. The betting book at 3 clubs had entries against monks. And I wrote to her 22 letters to her sister's house, which Quillen at last consented to direct, not to plead or not only. I sent her the parts as they were copied. I sent her the copyist's errors ringed. I sent her the horn player's complaint that the 3rd movement was unplayable, and her reply came back in 11 days, 4 words. He is quite right. I sent her the corrected line. I sent her every question the orchestra asked me and I could not answer, and she answered all of them. And by the middle of March, we were writing to each other every 2nd day about tempi and bowing, and whether a bassoon could be heard under a divided viola, and about nothing else at all, and I would have gone on so for 100 years. In the last week she wrote, you will conduct it yourself, I suppose. I wrote back, no. Bellamy will beat time. I have not the skill and I will not disgrace you. And she wrote, then who will turn the pages? I sat in my study at Harrowmere and read that line 17 times, and I began, at 40 minutes past 2 in the morning, to hope. She came to London on the 8th. She would not stay in my house, and I did not ask her to. She stayed with Quillen and his wife above the shop, which is where she had slept when she was 17, and she came to the rehearsals in her gray gown and sat at the back with her hands folded, and everyone assumed she was some relation of the music sellers, come to hear the great man's symphony. Bellamy took the first rehearsal. It was a shambles. He beat the second movement at a funeral pace, and the strings dragged, and the whole vast structure sagged in the middle like a wet rope, and I stood at the side of the hall in a rage I could not vent, because I had promised in writing twice, that I would not speak for her, and that no word of who she was would leave my mouth without her leave. At the break she came down the side aisle. She stopped beside Bellamy. "Sir, might I trouble you, bar 61. He looked at her, this shabby woman, with the ready charm of a man who has never once in his life been afraid of anyone. "My dear madam, it is marked held asterisk," she said, "and it wants to be held because the whole movement has been asking one question, and that is the only bar in which the music answers it, and you will not wait." The hall had gone quiet, 61 players, the cold patron in the shadows with his heart in his mouth. Bellamy laughed. "And what, pray, does a lady know of it?" I opened my mouth. I would have said it there and then, and ruined everything and been forgiven, perhaps, in about 11 years. But she turned her head and looked at me across 40 feet of the Argent rooms, and it was the look she had given me over the top of a pianoforte the night we met, that swift, guarded flicker of pure delight, put away instantly. And she shook her head 1 inch, and I shut my mouth and I did not speak, and that is the only wholly good thing I have ever done. "Nothing at all, sir," she said to Bellamy. "I am the page turner." And she went and sat down at the little stool at his left hand, where nobody would ever notice her, and she turned his pages for 2 hours exactly on the beat, and 11 times I counted. God knows I counted. Her chin moved a half beat before the phrase, and the orchestra, which had never heard of her, followed her chin. By the third rehearsal the second movement was correct. Bellamy congratulated himself. I said nothing at all. The 10th of April. 600 people and 600 candles and the whole of musical London come to see the cold patron produce a monk out of a hat. I had told them the composer's name would be disclosed from the platform. That was in every paper in the city. I stood in the anteroom in my black coat, and I could hear the noise of them through the wall like the sea, and Verity Ashcombe stood in front of me in her gray gown with her hands folded, and I said, "I have given you my word. Say it now. Say the word and I go out there and tell them the composer wishes to remain unknown, and I bear it, and they may say what they like of me. It costs me nothing. I have been laughed at before." "You have not," she said, "not once." "Then it is time." She looked at the door, the sea noise beyond it. "They will hate it," she whispered, "if they know." "Some of them," I said. "Yes." "You cannot promise otherwise." "No, I would not insult you." My hands were shaking. I put them behind my back. "Verity, I have thought of nothing else for 6 weeks, and I have only this to offer, and it is not much, and it is all I have. If you go out and are known, you may be a curiosity for a season, and they may not print you, and I cannot prevent it. And I am no longer certain that I could prevent anything. But if you do not go out, you will have written the greatest work of this age, and you will hear 600 people applaud a name that cannot come and take its bow, and you will go home above a shop and sit down and try to begin the next one. And I do not think," my voice went, and I mended it, "I do not think, my dear, that you can go on giving it everything and taking nothing forever, and not have it cost you the thing you are protecting." She stood very still. "Say it plainly," she said. "You have been feeding your name to your music for 11 years, I said. "I have watched you for 4 months, and I think it is beginning to eat your hands." She put her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes closed. "And if I am hated," Then I shall be hated beside you, which is a thing I have never done for anybody and would like very much to do. And if it is a curiosity, if it dies with me, then it dies 80 years hence in the muniment room of a bad duke, I said, and some ill-tempered woman on her knees in the dust holds it up to the window and sings 3 bars of it and cannot go on. And that is the whole of music, verity. It is nothing else. It never was. It is one person and one page and the terrible chance that somebody someday is listening. The bell rang, the sea noise dropped. And Verity Ashcombe, composer, 24 years old, ink on the side of her right forefinger, turned to the door of the argent rooms with her chin up half a beat before the phrase. "Then I had better go and turn the pages," she said. I have been asked to tell this part 100 times, and I have never told it right. We came out to the platform, all 3 of us, Bellamy in his splendid waistcoat to the desk, myself to the front to make the announcement they had all come for, and behind us, unremarked, a woman in gray who went to the little stool at the conductor's left hand and sat down with her hands in her lap. 600 faces. I have addressed the lords. I have never been frightened as I was frightened then. My lords, ladies, and gentlemen, you are here because I promised you a name. They laughed and settled and leaned in. For 7 years I have collected the works of a composer who signs himself Vesper. In that time I have offered a fortune for the name and been refused, and I have said, in rooms very like this one, a great many confident things about the man who wrote them. 6 weeks ago I learned that every one of those things was false. Not one. Every one. You could hear the candles. I told a room in the north that no woman could have written this symphony. I said it with the manuscript open under my hand. I took the 8 leaves out of my coat, creased, soft, carried for 4 months against a fool's heart, and I held them up. I was holding her pages while I said it. The noise that went through that hall was not applause and was not outrage. It was 600 people understanding something at the same instant, which is a sound I have heard exactly once. "Vesper is Miss Verity Ashcombe," I said, "of the North, a country organist's daughter who has written every note you will hear tonight, who has been paid £41 by the whole world for 11 years of her life, and who is at present sitting behind me on a stool because she was engaged this evening to turn the pages." She had gone white to the lips. She was gripping the seat of the stool with both hands. Bellamy stood at the desk holding the baton, his charming face perfectly empty. I walked back to him and I put out my hand, and I have never told him he did a fine thing and I ought to have. He was not wicked, only fashionable. He looked from me to her, and something moved across his face, and he laid the baton in my palm. I carried it to the little stool. I knelt down, not on one knee, not gallantly. I went down on both knees on the boards of the argent rooms in front of 600 people, which the Chronicle called the following morning the most vulgar exhibition ever made by a peer of the realm, and which my aunt from her seat in the second row said afterward was the first sensible act of my entire life. I held out the baton to her on my 2 hands, as one returns a thing to its owner. "Ma'am," I said, "it is yours, it always was. Will you conduct it?" Her eyes were enormous. Her mouth shaped something with no sound in it. "I do not know how," she said. "You have been doing it since October," I said. "With your chin, I have watched, so has the orchestra." And she began to laugh, a wild, cracked, half-weeping laugh. And she took the baton, and I got up off my knees and I sat down on the page-turner's stool in my black coat with my heart going like a hammer, and I settled the score on my knees and found the first page. She stood up. 61 men looked at a country organist's daughter in a mendied gray gown. She turned her head and looked at me on the little stool, and I have loved a great many bars of music in my life, and I have never seen anything as beautiful as her face at that moment, when she understood, before she understood anything else, before the fear or the joy, that she was not going to have to be silent any longer. She raised her hand. Nobody stopped her. I will not describe the symphony. That is not a thing prose does, and besides, half of England has heard it now, and the other half will. I will say that in the slow movement at bar 61, the whole vast structure came up to its question and asked it, and she held the answer and held it, and the 600 sat in that pause with nothing to hold on to at all. One beat. A rest on the hinge that cannot be hidden behind. Some of them wept. 2 subscribers walked out because a woman was conducting. 9 of the 61 players came to her afterward and asked to shake her hand. The Chronicle was foul and the Gazette was patronizing, and the Asterisk Review Asterisk, 3 weeks later, in a long and grudging and finally helpless essay, said that it did not signify who had written it, and that England had been given something it did not deserve. And in the front row, in the middle of the Andante, the Dowager Lady Cray reached across and gripped the wrist of the young woman beside her and said, in the loudest whisper in the history of the Argent Rooms, "That is my companion." I turned the pages, exactly on the instant. It is the humblest office in music. You sit, you count, you reach up, and if you are good at it, no living soul ever notices you exist. I was good at it. I had had a very fine teacher. Afterward, when they had let her go at last, when Quillen had wept into his hat and Bellamy had made his bow and the crowd had swirled away, we stood together in the empty hall with the chairs disordered and the candles guttering and the great room ticking as it cooled. She still had the baton in her hand. She had not been able to put it down. "You said," she began and stopped. "I said a great many things, nearly all of them wrong. You said you would be hated beside me. I meant it." "They did not hate me," she said wonderingly. "Not all of them, not all." "No." 2 men walked out. 2 men, I agreed. And 59 musicians who will tell every orchestra in Europe by Michaelmas that they have played it, and that they were conducted by the woman who wrote it, and that she held bar 61 for 1 beat longer than any man on earth would have dared. She looked down at the baton. The tears came then, at last, freely, the way they had not come in the muniment room, and I stood and let her weep in my own hall and did not touch her, because I had not the right, and I had learned that much at least. "I have nothing," she said. "I have £11 in a trunk and no character." "You have a symphony." "That is not a life, your grace." "No," I said. The last candle at the end of the row went out. It was very quiet. Somewhere in the street a link boy called. "Verity." "Yes." "When you were at Harrowmere you would not let me speak. I understood why. You ate my bread and slept under my roof, and you could not leave. And a man who says such things to such a woman is a scoundrel, and I would not be one, and so I said nothing for 4 months, and it very nearly killed me. My hands were shaking again. I let them. You do not eat my bread now. You are the most celebrated composer in England as of about an hour ago, and you have 61 men and a music cellar and my aunt at your back, and if I displease you, you may walk out of this room and you will be dining in Vienna within the year. Nothing binds you to me. Nothing whatever. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "Ambrose," she said, "it was the first time." "Marry me," I said. "Not to save you. You have saved yourself, and God knows I never once managed to. Marry me because you contradict me. Because you said asterisk no asterisk to 11 bars at 8 in the morning, and I sat outside the door in my dressing gown like a lunatic, and I have never been so happy in my life. Because you were the only creature in England who was not afraid of my hand." I stopped. I could not do the flourish. I did not have one. "Because I would rather turn your pages than raise my hand in any concert room on earth. Let me do it. Let me do it for the rest of my life." She stood in the wrecked, glorious, cooling hall with the baton in her fist and the ink still on her finger. "They will say," she said unsteadily, "that the Duke of Harrowmere made a fashion of a governess. They will say it for 2 years. Then the music will still be there, and we shall be dead, and the ill-tempered woman in the muniment room will not care 1 straw. They will say, you married me for my mind. Let them say it, I said. It is the only thing they will get right. And verity Ashcombe, Vesper, who had made a name out of the hour when they sing before the dark, because she had believed she must give up her own to be allowed to work at all, laid the baton down very carefully on the edge of the platform, as one sets down something one intends to pick up again in the morning. She put her hand into mine. We were married at Harrowmere in the second week of May, in the chapel, with the doors open onto the moor and every one of my tenants in the pews and my aunt weeping so loudly that the curate lost his place. There was no orchestra. There was a choir of 11, out of the village, because the organist's daughter said that a choir wants no more than 11 if the building is honest, and she had clapped her hands in the great hall on the day she came, and heard what the stone would do. She wrote the music for it herself, of course. 4 voices, and a single line for the treble at the end, and then a rest, 1 beat, on the hinge of it, where the whole thing had been asking one question, and every soul in that chapel stood in the silence with nothing to hold on to, and then the answer came. She published the next symphony under her own name, and it was received badly, and the one after that was received well, and the 5th is the one they play now. She was not a curiosity. She was a very great composer, and there were seasons when she was unfashionable, and years when they printed her grudgingly, and once a gentleman wrote to the *Review* to say that a female intellect could not sustain a full sonata form, and she read it aloud at breakfast in a voice of such rapture that she had to put down her cup. They will tell you that the cold patron discovered Vesper. Do not believe it. I discovered nothing. I bought 6 songs off a counter in the rain and spent 7 years being certain about the man who wrote them, and she sat 10 feet from me for 4 months and turned my pages and let me be a fool, and forgave me for it in a cold room with her trunk corded at her feet, and forgave me more than I deserved. I am an old man now. She is at the instrument in the winter parlor as I write this. I can hear her, 11 bars, and then the stop, and then no asterisk said aloud with tremendous disgust to nobody at all. I sit outside the door. I have sat outside that door for 40 years, and I am not tired of it. In a little while she will call me in, because there is a page she wants turned, and I will go, as I have always gone, and take the low stool at her left hand, and wait for her chin to move a half beat before the phrase. There is no better place in the world for a man to sit.